So at any moment, a critical meeting between European leaders and President Trump. They are rallying around the Ukrainian leader, President Zelensky, days before the meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska. The leaders are hoping to leave a lasting impression on the president, shape President Trump's views, remind him of what's at stake ahead of Friday's meeting, and encourage him and remind him of what is at stake with Kyiv's future and fate. Zelensky not expected to be at that summit in Alaska. It is raising worries that Ukraine could be forced into an unfavorable deal. A short time ago, President Zelensky issued a blunt assessment saying this: pressure must be exerted on Russia for the sake of a fair peace. Also saying we must learn from the experience of Ukraine and our partners to prevent deception on the part of Russia. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh is live in Kyiv. Just as this is going to all start getting underway, just kind of set the stakes here, Nick.
I mean, it's the future of Ukraine ultimately, and indeed dictates a lot of European security, probably for the remainder of our lifetimes here, if indeed Russia sees weakness in the transatlantic alliance and success here in Ukraine. Not to underplay what's at stake here. Look, President Zelensky is thought now, along with his European allies. He travelled to Berlin for this virtual conference to be alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. According to the timings we have, that meeting, possibly half an hour long, could already be underway with US President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. Vance was in London over the weekend previously, essentially firefighting to some degree the confusion and unease, as one European diplomat explained it to me, stemming from US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's handling of his meeting with the Kremlin. A European diplomat said to me it was amateurish on a matter of utmost importance, the way that Witkoff appeared to have not entirely grasped or correctly conveyed what Putin was indeed offering, or simply the fact it took days for many European allies to get a solid grasp of the potential proposal. That, I'm sure, will be part of the conversation now. Europe has been very consistent on its position, which is a ceasefire first. That's something President Trump originally signed up to months ago as well, and that the current line of contact, the current front line, is the starting point for negotiations. Zelensky himself has insisted that all conversations about Ukraine must be with Ukraine present. Europe has backed him up on that. A quick reminder, though, a moment like today, a virtual conference with President Trump and European leaders and President Zelensky setting out positions does echo what we saw back in May, when a ceasefire was demanded by Europe and Ukraine, and Trump was on the phone to his European allies saying he'd impose sanctions with them if Putin didn't go along with that suggestion. Putin didn't, and there wasn't sanctions, and there still aren't sanctions now. So there's a sense of repeat here potentially, but the stakes are remarkably high, because for the first time the bilateral between Trump and Putin in Alaska will be the first time potentially these two men could hash out some kind of deal. Ukraine will not accept it if they're not involved in its negotiation. But I think many on that call will be deeply anxious. Whatever they say, however they think they've swayed the president, his impenetrable relationship with President Putin could result in any potential outcome from this Alaska meeting. Back to you.
Nick Payton-Walsh in Ukraine for us. It's great to see you, Nick. Thank you so much.
President Trump meeting virtually with European leaders and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. This, of course, coming 2 days before he has that face-to-face with Russian President Putin on U.S. soil in Alaska. This is the first time, of course, Putin is setting foot on American soil in a decade. Zelensky himself not expected to be at that meeting on Friday, and that's prompting concern Ukraine may be forced into an unfavorable deal in order to achieve peace with Russia. Joining us now, CNN political national security analyst David Sanger and Ambassador Steven Sestanovich. He is the former U.S. ambassador at large to the former Soviet Union. Great to have both of you here. David, I want to start first with you. This meeting is happening as we're speaking virtually. It's also coming as we get information that Russia is making these advances in the Donetsk region where they're now evacuating children. They're evacuating families. That's what's on the line for the people of Ukraine as they sit down, and Putin has said, I'll end this war, but only if you give me this land. Walk us through a best case scenario coming out of this virtual discussion today.
Well, the best case scenario I could imagine would be that President Trump comes to an agreement with the European allies about what his red lines are, what he will not, what he would not allow the Russians to get. But the fact of the matter is that the Europeans and President Trump have been talking in very different terms about these discussions. The president keeps discussing land swaps, which suggests that the Russians may even get some territory that right now they are not occupying militarily. When you listen to the Europeans, they talk about security guarantees, about making sure that the flow of arms to Ukraine continues no matter what, and that's of course something that Putin wants to limit quite directly. They talk about making sure that the president doesn't commit NATO to pulling back from current positions in Eastern Europe. So they're worried that, of course, Putin will use the moment to take a pause, use the ceasefire to rebuild, and then continue to try to attack the rest of Ukraine at some point in the future.
And Ambassador, there's always the question with President Trump about who has spoken to him last. Has he been swayed by what they say? Do you think today's call could impact the president's thinking leading into Friday?
Well, the sign that the president listens to different people and changes his predictions as to what's going to happen in the meeting are in the two different versions that he has of what's going to happen. There's the he'll be in listening mode version, and then there's the land swaps version. One is involves active negotiating, and the other just involves seeing what's on Putin's mind, to use the president's terms. The Europeans are nervous about both of those. They don't want either land swaps or listening mode. They don't want the president to find out what's on Putin's mind. They want him to try to change it. And that means using the leverage that jointly Western governments have developed for helping Ukraine and for putting Putin more on the defensive than he has been. They're worried, the Europeans are worried that that's not going to be his approach.
And David, to that point, the last time we saw Trump and Putin together, that press conference, I mean, everyone remembers that, and how the president did side with Vladimir Putin on a lot of issues. What is your thinking around how he's going into Friday's meeting? Did he learn from that moment? Is he still in a place where he could, where we could see him reacting in the same way as we did all those years ago?
Well, we don't know how much he's learned from that moment. I was at the first meeting that they ever had together, which was in Hamburg in 2017. And that was a summit meeting. And when after the two of them met, the president called me on his cell phone to say, President Putin just said to me that the Russians could not have been involved in the 2016 elections because they're so good at cyber, they never would have been caught. And isn't that right? So he had basically adopted the Putin's position over the position that that he had heard from all of his intelligence agencies. He went on to do that in public later on, and many times after that. So yeah, I think he is susceptible to a Putin version of history here, that somehow the Ukrainians provoked Russia into invading the country. In fact, the president himself used those lines earlier this year.
Yeah. And Ambassador, look, as you noted, this has been described by the White House as a listening exercise. That's how they're thinking about it. And we have to remember, Putin's one of the best trained operatives in the world. He's very, very good at manipulation and psychological manipulation and strategy. How are you thinking about all of this?
Putin is pretty good at manipulating people who are willing to be manipulated. I think one of the questions that is particularly interesting, to which we don't have an answer, and David has just shown you we don't have an answer, is how worried is President Trump about seeming to be manipulated by Putin? Is he worried that he'll come out of this meeting seeming like Putin's dupe? The Europeans, I would think, in subtle ways, without seeming too heavy-handed, are trying to convey to the president in this meeting they're having right now that he's got to, exercise his role as leader of the free world, not come out of this looking like somebody who has been taken advantage of in a real estate deal. And that is something that presumably the president's advisors are telling him as well. There's some political damage for you in looking as though you're a dupe.
Yeah. All right, David Sanger, Ambassador Sestanovich, thank you to both of you. We appreciate it.